Welcome to Knocking to 10, the podcast for go-to-market leaders scaling from 0 to 10 million and beyond. I'm John DiLoretto, founder of Knock2. Each week, I sit down with founders, operators, and go-to-market leaders to pull back the curtain on what's fueled their success and the hard-earned lessons they've picked up along the way. New episodes drop weekly. Subscribe to follow along. Welcome back to Knocking to 10, tactical chats with the leaders going from 0 into tens of millions in ARR. I'm John DiLoretto, founder of Knock2. Today's guest has racked up 3 exits as a VP of sales and wrote the book on keeping it real while you sell. Joining me today is Jeff Kirchick, former VP of sales at YC-backed NextCaller, acquired by Pindrop, head of sales at Able AI, acquired by Moody's, VP of sales at Allwhere, and now leading sales at Zorro. He's closed 9-figure logos, authored Authentic Selling, advises multiple seed stage startups, and angel invests in B2B software on the side. Jeff, awesome to have you. That's a serious resume.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's get a little bit of, for the audience, a little bit about your journey. Take us back a little bit. So how does a Princeton graduate end up writing a book on selling and leading 4 go-to-market teams as a VP of sales, all in the span of what, 15 years?
Yeah. I guess you could say this is probably not a good thing, but I don't think I had the same intentionality as a lot of the kids I went to school with. A lot of kids who go to Princeton are type A kids who, they come out of the womb wanting to be doctors and lawyers or Wall Street bankers or consultants. And I was interested in a lot of different things. I did English and creative writing as my major, and I wrote a creative thesis. So I was very interested in the creative stuff. I actually thought about going into teaching and looked at some teaching jobs. I had a job offer to go work for the Pittsburgh Pirates in sales, actually, which is kind of random, but jobs in sports, because I had worked for the Boston Red Sox a little bit in high school and in college. So I was like a little bit all over the place. And I saw a job posting that said the harder you work, the more money you'll make for this job at Level Up. And that really resonated with me. I'd walked onto the wrestling team in college. I was very competitive and obviously being, everyone's financially motivated, whether they admit it or not, but it wasn't even just like the money aspect of that tagline that caught my attention. It was more so just the agency. I liked the idea that I was in control of my own destiny. And so I took that sales job, and it was a unique start for me because I got elevated into a leadership role very quickly, but not by merit. It was more so by the company pivoting. So the company pivoted products, and they needed people to lead some of their legacy verticals. And so I just jumped into the higher education vertical. I built a name for myself in that space, got recruited away to a higher education company to lead one of their teams, and so on and so forth. I ended up having various leadership roles in sales. But then you asked about the book, and the book, really came about because I wanted to write. I have this interest in writing, and I've always wanted to become a screenwriter and follow more of a creative path. But COVID presented a really good opportunity for me to do it. My company was going through an exit. I had just sold a lot of really large deals to some Fortune 100 brands, and I'd done it really without too much process. And so I felt that there was something around authenticity and just genuine relationship building that I wanted to share with others. And so that's kind of how the book came about.
Very cool. Okay. All right. We'll go back into the book a little bit more in a minute. But for those who Level Up name isn't familiar, if you went to college in the 2010s, it was the little white box sitting on the countertop right next to the point of sale system.
Yep.
And remind me, I think Level Up had a really clever approach where they figured out if you put through all of your payment processing at one time at the end of the month versus every single transaction, you're able to save quite a few bips. Is that the story behind Level Up?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's not a lot of people know that, but yeah, it's every time you do a transaction, there's an interchange fee, and if you were to kind of aggregate all of those in one large transaction, you can obviously save on that. And so yeah, that was a way that they were kind of developing that. And this was actually the early days of mobile payments, and ironically, Level Up was actually maybe a little early for its time. Mobile payments are ubiquitous now with everything. You carry your phone around to pay for things.
Sure.
But back then it was fairly new. And the company had gone through several pivots. They had started out as this mobile game called Scavenger, so they actually changed their name at one point.
Did you join when it was a mobile games company?
I did, yeah, and that was the legacy vertical that I stayed on. I sold this, we had this higher education vertical of like 300 higher like colleges and universities that were using this game, and I was like the face of the brand for all these schools and whatnot.
This is when you're what, 22 years old?
Yeah, 22, 23. I was like going to speak at all these different events and stuff. So like I said, I kind of fell into it. It's not like I didn't get like, no one said Jeff's amazing, we're going to promote him. It just kind of happened that I got to lead this thing, and I like was owning this thing like right away out of school. So I just like I made the most of it, and yeah, it was pretty cool.
Very cool. All right, so obviously cut your teeth in your roots at Level Up, but then have since gone on to 4 or 5 other companies where you have been like a key leadership hire there, building out their sales program. If you had to kind of reflect back on these playbooks, particularly from seed to Series B, if you were to sort of give some advice to folks that are getting hired into heads of sales roles, maybe their first or second time VP of sales, what are some of these first principles perhaps that you have carried over from one role to the next that you felt like have been like authentic to who you are as a seller or building a sales program?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, the first thing I would say is like seek help, because like I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was I probably got I'm just being totally honest. I think I probably got a little bit of a big head back then. I think I probably felt, by virtue of the way that my career had started, that I knew a lot more than I really did, and that I could kind of wing it and figure it out, or by virtue of my work ethic, that I would be a strong performer. And two things can be true at once. I think it's true that I probably bulldogged my way into some level of success, but I also probably could have worked half as hard had I been taking advice from others, or seeking out mentorship, or being very intentional with my professional development. And so, or maybe not even work half as hard, but maybe I would have achieved twice as much.
Sure.
Either way, like I think that's the most important thing. Like first, even your second time, your third, your fourth time, it doesn't matter how many times you've done it. I'm still learning all sorts of things, like even just from doing podcasts like this, or like being a member of various professional development organizations. There's a lot to learn. Sales is like very much a science. I think the art of selling comes kind of naturally to me, but the science of it is more challenging. And so I've had to really be intentional about that. The principles are really aligned to the science, which is, going through those, like the product market fit phase and understanding what that actually means. Being able to understand when you have the right unit economics that allow you to scale. Being disciplined about your ideal customer profile and not chasing shiny objects. Tracking that data, being very principled on your data. These are all things that, people will nod their heads if they've been around the game for a while, but these are like core principles that if you're not doing them as a first-time VP of sales, you're really kind of missing the plot.
Yeah, you talked a bit about mentorship. Are there particular mentors in your life today? And just curious, where you sought them out, how they came a part of your life, and what does that relationship look like for you on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, I mean, I did seek out a mentor in just like my, I guess you could call it professional community. I met a mentor in the wild, my first job when I was at a conference in San Francisco, who happens to be here in Boston and a CEO of a tech company, and we've built a really strong friendship.
Yep.
And he's been a great mentor for me. But I think the other mentors are people that, you might not even like formally call them a mentor, but they become what you would think of as a mentor to you. And so, I've been very privileged to work in various startups, and naturally, whether it's the CEOs of some of these companies or another person on the leadership team who I really respected, like you kind of go to the same people with some of your questions. It might be about, hey, should I take this job? In fact, like when I was interviewing for jobs recently, the CEO of NextCaller was a reference call for me across, a few different places that were making offers. And then I went to go talk to him, like, hey, which founder, who do you like, right? Like, I mean, I value his input because he knows what it's like to work with me. And so I think that these relationships, I think having a formal mentor is great, but I also think that there's like these informal kind of mentoring opportunities where you can just keep people tight in your network. And, what you want to obviously do is try to make sure you give them value back too. But yeah, I'd say that that's what it's been like for me.
Yeah, I've always found, at least, many times earlier stage startups, your boss is going to be the CEO, founder of the company, and so needing to find an outlet that is not as, I guess, like emotionally charged in the day to day. And like for me, finding a senior leader within the business who's a bit more removed, not in the direct line of fire of revenue, has been like a helpful way to stay very connected, but to know that when your manager is also the founder of the company and the CEO of the business, oftentimes that extra time for mentorship may not be available,
Yep.
and need to seek it out elsewhere. All right, so you think back, you've done this now 3 or 4 times, maybe even more. Common missteps on the 0 to 10 climb. Looking back in hindsight, what are perhaps some things where you would have done it differently, or perhaps some mistakes you made in those early stages, and in hindsight, thinking a bit differently about it?
Yeah, I'd say that's the same one that comes up often. And it's a hard one to solve. So you have to give yourself a little bit of grace on this, but it's being a little bit too wide on who you're kind of conversing with. And look, and I could point to some examples, like at NextCaller, this was an enterprise fraud and authentication tool. Like the available kind of customer base was somewhat limited in terms of the sheer number of folks that we would sell to. But these were big accounts too. But there were also some technical parameters that we required. And I think, because we were young and we wanted to perhaps even learn about the market and learn what we needed to do from a product development perspective, we spent a lot of time talking to a lot of folks that frankly, we just weren't going to, get very far along with. So I think that was like a pretty obvious mistake to me in retrospect. And then, at Able, I think there are maybe some similar things where, this was like a commercial lending tool. And there were a lot of criteria that we started to realize were important for us in terms of maybe making some leads more attractive than others. Now, the problem is that on day one, you don't know that. You don't know on day one what some of these attributes are that you need to be on the lookout for. So for example, if they had just implemented a specific software tool that we integrated with, it actually made them an unattractive target for us, because they would be too consumed emotionally and like financially with that investment for at least like the next 12 months. But we didn't know that, right? We had to have like a handful of people like tell us no, or like, we had to kind of kiss some frogs, if you will, in order to like realize that. But I just think that like, when I look at that experience, I'm like, well, could I have maybe started to get some of that intuition a little bit faster, right? Because the speed really does matter. So I would say that even attributes that you don't think matter, a lot of people look at the basics. They're like, what industry are they in? What persona am I talking to? There's a lot of attributes that you might not be thinking about, like a certain tech stack that they have and how long they've had it, or like what level of sophistication they have. Ironically, the more sophisticated they are, the less likely they might be to like buy a tool, because they might be more inclined to build it on their own, right? So like, there's a lot of things that like you might not know on day one to measure, but you still need to have the ability to go back and think holistically about what happened in all of these conversations, and be very proactive about starting to discriminate against different types of leads or targets based on the information, past experiences. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. It is a process, but through the right amount of synthesis, ultimately you will get there. But I hear you, like you need to be very open-minded in your synthesis to make sure that you're not being too narrow in focus. All right, so I think like maybe now would be a good time to jump into exploring a bit more about the book.
Sure.
It is pretty unusual for someone to carve out the time early stage of their career to get to write a book, particularly about what they've been practicing. Pretty cool that you put this out during a time of like a pretty compelling exit for the business. Would love to hear a little bit more about, like, kind of give us the 90-second pitch, and then we can kind of get into it a little bit further.
Sure. There's two ways to think about the thesis of the book. One is through the context of, or the lens of, artificial intelligence. And I know that's a big buzzword and everyone's using it all the time, but you have to remember I wrote this 4.5 years ago. So it was actually kind of before all this stuff. And what I was saying at the time was that if you're overly regimented in your sales process, then it's theoretically possible for AI to learn the same frameworks as you and then take your job. Because if you're just following a script or a playbook or a process, that's overly prescriptive, then a machine can learn that, and then authenticity will be important for you.
Yeah.
The other thesis is really just that, irrespective of like the practical nature of this with regards to artificial intelligence, that like people just trust authentic people.
Yeah.
Like if you present an honest version of yourself, it doesn't matter if you're likable or not. People will just believe what you say. And it's the most important part of sales. And, I've given examples of people in real life who've done this, and like they're not necessarily good people. Like one of my favorite examples is Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman is like a weird guy who's done a lot of bad things, but like he's also famous literally on account of the fact that he's authentic, and he is not he's weird, but he's not putting on an act.
Yeah, that is truly who he is.
He is, and like, and so like, and like, by the way, like he's earned the trust of the North Korean dictator.
Yeah.
Not a good thing, but the fact that like someone who hates everyone else wants to be friends with this guy tells you that like authenticity can be a good thing. And when I say this, by the way, a lot of people get pissed off because, again, it's not about whether he's a good guy. It's just about whether authenticity actually helps people in life. And I think in that case, it's, there's no doubt that even if he's a subpar in certain ways, that has helped him. So I'd say that those are kind of the two theses of the book.
Yeah. How do you help coach that into reps who are kind of, learning their sales process? You're perhaps putting in a bit of a methodology to make sure that they're, using the right framework. How do you help someone balance both like being tactical in their approach and making sure you're collecting relevant information, feed into your CRM, your sales process to qualify, whatever it might be, do proper discovery with, getting them to feel comfortable in their own skin? When you're putting on kind of your coaching hat here, how do you sort of coach that into people?
Yeah, there's two parts to that. One is very practical and the other is a little weird, but I'll tell you both.
Okay.
Practical one is just that like a framework is not a linear sales process. A framework is a way for you to be accountable and honest about what you have in your deal. But if you don't know the decision maker, and that's the one thing you need, it doesn't mean you just go ask for the decision maker. It's not supposed to be telling you what to do. It's just like when we forecast or where we score an opportunity, we can score it. But it's not supposed to be linear. In fact, like a lot of times sales reps make the mistake of trying to push something across too fast because they are trying to follow what they think is a process and they're not actually listening to the customer. And so that's the number one. It's like, if I give you a framework, it's a framework for you to operate within, but like be yourself within that framework, Number two is just an attachment, and this is the part that's weird, but it's like, we are specks of dust, flying through the universe, and our lives are fairly meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And we place disproportionate emphasis on whatever's right in front of us.
Yep.
And you have to understand that, like, you have to be able to let go of whatever bad thing happens to you, whether it's, something serious in your life, or if it's just like the sale that didn't happen, right? Like life will go on. There was life before that thing. There's going to be life after that thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's a hard thing to tell people because, we all have to put food on the table, but it actually helps them be better. If they can actually have that mindset, it will help them, ironically will help them do the thing that they're scared of losing, which is, to be able to put food on the table. So if you can disattach or unattach yourself, or detach, I guess is the right word, from the outcome, then I think that's huge as well.
Interesting. So then what is your take on sales methodologies then? I noticed like in the past, you have implemented some of the more complex ones. I saw like MedPick, which is historically enterprise sales. Mm-hmm. How do you believe in implementing like a methodology if you're a sales leader to put some structure into your team? And how do you balance that?
I do, but again, only through the lens of understanding where we are in the deal. I think it's good for us to be tracking MedPick, because otherwise, if I don't have something, then how do we know from a forecasting perspective, what to expect with that opportunity? If we don't even know their decision criteria, for example, which is, the one of the D's in MedPick, then, obviously we're not really in a position to win the deal. Now, again, that doesn't mean that I'm gonna go tell the rep, go get the decision criteria. It just means that when we are looking at that deal objectively, that that's something we know about it, right? So there's a difference. And so I do think that frameworks are actually pretty important to have, because on a leadership level, you need to be able to report on these things, and you need to help reps be honest about where they are in their opportunities. But I think where it can be dangerous is when, I was talking to a founder of a company the other day, and he said like the sales reps are all mad at the sales leader because he will literally just go through MedPick, and whatever they're missing, he's like, go get that thing. And that's how he's coaching. And the reps are all like, well, it's not that simple. Like, you don't understand the politics of what's going on in this relationship. And it frankly isn't that simple. So that's where it gets dangerous, is when you actually use it as a process and not a framework of understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, my like on a personal level have always felt that like authentic listening is kind of like has always been my key to successful sales, is really being present and actually trying to help people solve for the problem. And if you're working your way down a checklist, trying to check boxes and fill things in, that you could probably miss, you know, the most important insights that they're willing to part with you and share.
Totally.
Love the idea of detaching from the outcome and not being entirely stuck in. And knowing that, like, releasing the tension that it's not life or death if ultimately they don't move on. So then how do you think about, so for you putting authenticity at the forefront, some of the first use cases of AI have been more so about just kind of creating, I would say, like a multitude of output and creating more content, writing more emails, et cetera, but perhaps detaching from authenticity. Are there ways that you are thinking about or incorporating like AI in your business that allows you to actually be more authentic or take away some of that admin that is allowing you to kind of shine and say, like, this is how we're gonna build our business in the right way?
Yeah, this is a loaded question for me. I'm a big fan. I've like my own cold email thing that I've been doing for a long time.
Yep.
That it leans more into shared values, which is something that makes, you, John, and me part of the same tribe.
Okay.
People are very tribal. It's an evolutionary biology thing. They want to be accepted and part of a team. And I won't get into it, but like politics is the best example you can think of in our society today. And so generative AI now doing personalization is pretty predictable to me that this would not work out very long. I mean, it's still in motion, but I think it won't. The reason why is because if I say, hey, John, notice that you went to Lawrenceville or whatever, and like this is a thing that's you already know about yourself. It's personalized, but it's not interesting to you. It's something you already know about you. And if, by the way, like 5 or 6 people are doing the same thing, then like it's actually not that interesting. But if I say like, hey, John, I noticed you went to Lawrenceville, and you and I have these 5 friends in common, and I actually went to sell at Lawrenceville once. It's a true story. I did go down there to sell something early in my career, and I met the director of admissions, and it's a great school. And like now you and I are like tied in a unique way. That's actually like a really bad example too, because it's like there's not even a value that we're sharing there, but it's more just like people we know. But in any event, like that works. It's hard for you to ignore that if I write you that email, because it's like, this is someone who is kind of tied to me in a specific way. And that's what I teach people to do. It's like, show them that you are part of the same tribe. AI can't do that. AI can't do that because AI doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have experiences, and it can't relate to people in that way. So I think the generative AI thing is actually, it's cool, but it's not, I don't think it's actually as scalable as people think it is.
And if I had to replay that back, is it because it lacks the context on your shared experience and like your experience beyond what's on public information of LinkedIn or whatever it might be?
Yes, but I will caveat that like there's another way to do cold email where generative AI can work, which is to do more with relevance. So for example, like, at my last company, if people were hiring remote workers or contractors internationally, it was going to be a real challenge for them to onboard those individuals. And if we could see that, you could use AI scripts to see if someone was hiring internationally. You'd actually time a good email to someone to say, hey, I see you're hiring contractors in Brazil. Like, you're probably about to have this challenge. That's effective, because that's taking away a lot of research and time for a human being. And we know that's a huge problem, and we know that it's relevant to them, and they're either interested or they're not. And to me, like, that's maybe a better application for it. But for more high value sales, I would say it's harder to achieve that.
Okay. Where can people find your book if they wanted to download it, buy it, et cetera?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the usual suspects. And appreciate all the support.
Okay. And then the title of the book is, just one more time?
Authentic Selling: How to Use the Principles of Sales in Everyday Life.
Cool. Okay. Amazing. All right. Let's jump into the other side here. So obviously you've been an operator a number of times. Over the years, you've become a bit of an advisor and now have written a number of angel checks. Would love to understand kind of the psychology of sitting on the other side there. So really just curious to ask, what kind of patterns? What are you looking for when you're making an investment as someone who continues to be an operator day to day? What are you looking for in both the founders and the company itself to make an investment?
Yeah, I mean, for these early stage companies, you're really betting on the people in the space at the end of the day. Like, are they in a market that makes, where there's a big opportunity? Are we seeing a pattern of activity in that space? So for example, like, I've invested in QuotaPath, which is a commission tracking tool, and like there's actually a lot of competition in that space.
Yeah.
It's like a pretty hot market. And the founder was founded another company before that, which I think again is like indicative of potential success. I think, frankly, if you can find someone who's already been a founder before, that's really huge as well. But the number one thing I look for is like if they have identified early in their deck the TAM, like if they looked at what is the total addressable market, and like why this is the space that someone needs to focus on today.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing. And a lot of people, a lot of it, founders kind of like skip past that because they're so excited about what they do. But a lot of times, if you have something really cool in a really small market, it's actually not that interesting. So I'd say that's probably the big thing for me.
So how would you go about determining whether or not the TAM is too small?
It's a good question. Typically, I'll like try to do some research with people I know, like who are in that space. Like I'm part of the Stage 2 Capital Network, and so there's a lot of other like go-to-market leaders in that organization that I can like reach out to and say, hey, like I'm looking at this. You know a little bit about this space. Like, what do you think, right? So I'll try to honestly just kind of like leverage my network for that. But yeah, admittedly, I could probably turn that more into a science than I have.
Yeah. And when you do invest, do you actually go in and help advise these companies as well in terms of like, are you helping them implement their initial go-to-market phase?
It depends. Some of them I've been kind of a joint advisor / investor, and others I've just done like investments and no real like hands-on at all. And then in other scenarios, I'm just an advisor where I don't actually really have skin in the game. And one recently, I was actually an investor, and then they came back to me about doing some advisory work. So obviously I, increased my shares to do that. So I'm kind of in it in both ways in that one. So just kind of depends on, the situation.
Yeah. Any particular companies you're excited about that you're either investing or advising in right now?
Yeah. I mean, look, obviously I'm excited about all of them.
Yeah.
I think SendSpark is one that I've been involved with for a really long time now. Well, long time being maybe a few years, but they're in the video messaging space. They're competing with like the Vidyard and Looms of the world, and they've really demonstrated a unique product differentiation, and they're starting to achieve some really strong metrics right now. So I'm excited about them. And then there's one that's really kind of under the radar, but it's called Brave. It does 3D printing of bras, and they're moving into also kind of being like the Whoop of bras. They can kind of assess health of women by having like a microchip essentially like in the bra. And they have some exciting things in the works right now, some interesting conversations, pilots, things like that, and a really cool founder. That's just like a massive space. If they succeed in that space, they will be big winners. So I'm really excited about what they're doing as well.
Very cool. Okay, I'm back on the tech side. So you mentioned that the first company you mentioned is obviously it's a software platform.
Yep.
When you think about advice you would give to your like founder when they're thinking about going to that stage, maybe it's between A and B stage to bring in like a true VP of sales. So maybe they already have someone that's kind of leading sales, but they're ready to kind of scale up. What are some of the attributes, things that you would be looking for, advice you give to go out and find that person who's going to go from being like what is perhaps taking you to your first million or two in revenue to getting you from that 2 to 10 million stage? What are some of those criteria, attributes you look for?
Yeah, I mean, at that level, what you're really looking for is someone who knows how to hire and develop really good talent and to build out an A+ team. And look, I actually am not the type of person who would tell you that you have to go find someone who's done that before. I think that a lot of times people over-index for, experience and whether someone's accomplished something or not, but there's a million people who've done something in a mediocre way and just as many who just have never got the opportunity to do it yet.
Yep.
The attributes you're looking for are, A, like, do they know how to build a framework? Do they have like a scientific process about how they want to build a go-to-market motion? Like I would actually have them, I would give them the exercise and give them the metrics and have them say like, okay, based on our data, like what would you do? Like how would you build out the motion? how would you hire? How many people would you hire? Why that number of people? What would their quotas be, right? Like I would want to see that they have a game plan that makes sense for how they're going to develop the organization. What kind of culture are you hiring for in the sales team? How are you going to measure that, right? Like even the hiring process, Mark Roberge talks about this in his book, Sales Acceleration Formula,
Yep.
About how it should be more of a science and somewhat objective, more so than arbitrary in terms of scoring the candidates. So I think that's what you're looking for when you're hiring that type of VP of sales. Before that, you're actually looking for more of an entrepreneur,
Yep.
when you're like at the 0 to 1, someone who's
Yep.
going to like give feedback to the product team and like kind of be like a stakeholder in the business. Not that they're not as you grow, but yeah, I think when you're going more from like, let's call it 1 to 2 and you're trying to get to 10,
Yep.
the goal is like, hey, is this someone who can attract talent and build a plan and keep that talent sticky to the organization?
Yeah. Okay. So someone who one can actually think through the true spreadsheet of like, how are the economics of this business model going to work, and
Yep.
like what are the inputs and outputs that are going to keep our like CAC manageable to actually grow this sustainable. And then 2, is this person like magnetic? Can they go out and recruit a team and like compel people to want to work and be motivated on their behalf, and then upskill those folks, et cetera. So
Yeah.
need someone who has like, I guess both sides of the brain, a little bit of like a bit of a the right persona to attract and upskill that team, but also can put the spreadsheets on and think through the math problem. So
Yep.
okay, so it's a a hard thing to find both of those, but it seems like you've been able to do it plenty times over. So those teams all must be lucky to have you on their advisory side. All right, maybe we'll just do a couple rapid fire and then wrap things up. But maybe we'll get your hot takes. So I wouldn't be surprised by this if it sounds like you're probably selling AI SDRs. So I think we can skip that question, move to the other ones. But maybe how about this? What is like a hard lesson you would instill in every first-time VP of sales?
Yeah, the one I'd tattoo on them.
Yeah.
I'd probably say no first-time founders.
Don't work for a first-time founder?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that one's a little bit harsh. I would say product market fit. Very important. Don't skip product market fit.
Yeah. What if, tell you what, on the other side, maybe what would be some advice you'd give them? Say they go through the exercise the founder gave them, great exercise for them. If you were to flip it over and say, hey, if you're a VP of sales, here are some things you should do to qualify this company on your end, outside of, trying to size up product market fit. What would you advise them to do to determine this company is legit? I should, bet my next 2 years of my career on this.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the stage of the company, but I think, obviously you want to have various conversations with the CEO. That's who you're working for, or the CRO.
Yep.
You want to understand what are their expectations. Where do those expectations come from? Why are those the expectations? I'd want to meet the people who set the expectations, which are typically the investors.
Yep.
And I'd again want to understand how they got to those numbers. Like you can notice a trend here. You want to know what the expectations are. The average tenure of a VP of sales is like 17 or 18 months. Now, I'm sure a lot of VP sales suck at their job and probably just like they deserve these short stints. But, I think another thing is also true is that like our industry is probably a little bit lacking in terms of maybe the support and resources. And let's face it, the expectations just grow and grow and grow. And, the multiples that people are chasing are often absurd. And so I think that you want to make sure you're putting yourself in a position where you can actually win.
Yeah. Okay. What, either now or maybe at a previous role, what's one thing that you were doing that nobody else is doing in terms of your outbound motion?
I mean, I think it's the thing I told you before. I think it's the thing about shared values. I mean, that's something that I've taken everywhere I've gone, and I've built a lot of content around it and done a lot of speaking around it and stuff like that. And everywhere I go, whenever we implement it, and it's not smoke and mirrors, customers say like, this is like the best email I ever got. I'm only, I want to meet with you because you went out of your way to do this. And, we get complimented everywhere we go with this methodology, and we're making someone's day brighter because we're actually spending time, and what AI is doing is it's pretending to spend time.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of disingenuous, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing that I'm doing differently.
Yeah. And people can learn all about this in your book.
A little bit, yeah. There's a chapter about it in the book, yeah.
Very cool. Okay. All right, last one. Let's do. You have like a wild deal story, like the longest deal or craziest deal you've ever been a part? It seemed like you've been a part of many different deal cycles. Any particular memorable ones?
Yeah, there's one that I like. I was trying to sell a deal to one of the largest insurance carriers in the country, Fortune 100 brand. They went with our competitor, but I maintained a relationship with the champion there for probably a year and a half, 2 years. When I say, maintained a relationship, I mean, like, actually hung out, we hang out, watch hockey together, spend time with text back and forth. Just built a close relationship. I didn't view it as like, this transaction or anything. And there eventually a window opened up where something was going off with that vendor competitor. It's actually the one who ended up acquiring us at the end of the day. So when we took this account from them, and I got in there with a partner.
Yeah.
We co-sold an opportunity, and the reason that worked well is because, like, the reason they'd gone with the competitor is because we had missing functionality that this partner had, and so we were able to actually work together to go back and win a 7-figure deal with this very large company, and then they had a lot of expansion after that too. So again, it just goes to show, like, treat people like people and not like dollar signs or something, and sometimes the flow of life will kind of take you in the right direction.
Yeah, I think if I had to summarize all of this, it seems like you are able to very meticulously take a long-term view on your career and on your relationships, and you trust in the fact that doing the right thing and putting people and relationships first are going to pay off in the long run, and that will overwhelmingly carry you through to the finish line versus short-term tactical things that ultimately are burning relationships and are not reaping rewards in the long term. So.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well said. All right. Okay. So last thing, where can people follow you? I know we can find your book on Amazon, but where do people follow up with you? Are you big on LinkedIn, X? What's your platform?
I would say LinkedIn. Yeah, just Jeff Kirchick. I think it's Jeff-Kirchick. Find me on there. I would love to connect with folks. Always learning, like I said. So would love to meet new people.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you. Great advice, great feedback, lots of learning lessons for early stage founders, later stage VPs. Thank you all for tuning in. That's it for Knocking to 10. If you are looking to follow along, you can follow us on Spotify and YouTube, and check out knock2.ai if you're looking to turn your anonymous traffic into deals. We will catch you next time. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, John.